2024 for music has been a super memorable year for a variety of reasons in a number of genres. For myself, personally too, I do have to acknowledge that this year has been my biggest year on YouTube in the over 5 years I've been dropping videos. I make one of these kind of videos every year, and that won't be changing. First one up, number 25, is I Lay My Life Down For You by JPEG Mafia. At this point, we expect a level of creativity and experimentation from JPEG Mafia, and he rarely fails to disappoint. This new album is by far his most quote-unquote rock-inspired and infused one. He's dabbled in these sounds before, of course, especially on projects like All My Heroes Are Cornballs. You know content-wise kind of what to expect with JPEG Mafia. He exists in the realm of the chronically online observer, teetering the line between raw emotion and dark comedy. But no matter what sound that approach is packaged in, it's always super engaging. 24 might be the polar opposite to this album. Cassandra Jenkins' first album in 3 years, My Light, My Destroyer. I was introduced to her music in 2021 with an overview on Phenomenal Nature, an album I would describe as deeply tender and human. The new album expands on those themes, tackling some pretty heavy subject matter in some of the most serene songs you'll ever hear. It's the kind of chill, low-key, but incredibly sophisticated pop music that immediately transcends you. Warm guitars, saxophones, and tight drums are the sound palette as she surfs cosmic waves about some of the smallest, most intimate moments of life. 23, Ariana Grande's latest album, Eternal Sunshine. Whilst not reinventing the wheel, Ariana Grande dropped a mature and polished pop/R&B collection of bops. Yes And, which was the lead single, was actually a bit of a misleading track to introduce us to this world, as the album doesn't really have any other songs nearly as dance-inspired. Nevertheless, it's a super solid track list. The Boy Is Mine, We Can't Be Friends, Imperfect For You, and the title track. Her vocal talent and hands-on approach to production is well documented, and she provides us with what we expect from her with a sprinkle of new sounds. Particularly the song Bye, an amazing 70s disco-inspired song that I've never really heard from her before. 22 is from an artist that has been having a year of just going from strength to strength to strength. That's Alligator Bites Never Heal by Doechii. Admittedly, I was late to the hype. I only took the time to listen to this album in the last few weeks, but I immediately got why the buzz around her is so strong. Personality is the main selling point for me. The willingness to experiment and manipulate her voice with a string of hard-hitting, tongue-in-cheek bars is what attracts me to her music. You can hear the influences of the likes of Missy Elliott and Outkast and Kendrick Lamar. It's a versatile collection of boom bap, R&B, and neo-soul songs. Doechii is clearly an extremely confident and capable artist that will only improve and widen in her scope. 21 is Scrapyard by Quadeca, an artist that continues to surprise with every release, of course, considering his beginnings. A lot looser in concept and sound than his previous releases, Scrapyard is kind of what it says on the tin. A loose collection of some of Quadeca's strongest production and songwriting to date. It's dreamy in spots, hard-hitting in others, and another display of his ever-improving musical chops. In particular, Texas Blue with Kevin Abstract, which might be my favorite Quadeca song ever to date. Next one is 20, that's Dark Times by Vince Staples. To me, this feels like the conclusion of his loose trilogy of emotionally charged, somber albums. It's got some of the most soulful production on any Vince Staples project. He continues to show his super unique approach to dark, tragic hood stories. Never one to chase any sort of trend, Vince Staples is still making music very much on his terms. A stacked track list with the likes of Black and Blue, Children's Song, and in particular Etouffee. He sticks with his seemingly detached monotone delivery, but it still works every time for him, especially considering the subject matter on a lot of these songs. 19 feels like it could be a companion piece to this Vince Staples album from an artist he's worked with before in the past. That's Pointy Heights by Fouché. Fouché has one of the most unique voices out there for me, and I was super surprised by her fusion of reggae sensibilities with her usual alternative R&B/indie rock sound. It's not a surprise, however, when you learn that the album is essentially an exploration of her Jamaican heritage. Her voice is as light and soft as ever, but in this new, more upbeat, danceable context, it's another step in her continuing evolution. 18 is Movie by Your Old Droog. An artist I've been sleeping on for sure. This is the first full-length album I've actually ever heard from him. Movie is an apt title considering how detailed, vivid, and personal this collection of classic New York-style raps are. He explores his unique experiences as a Ukrainian-American immigrant growing up in Brooklyn. The album is driven by a lot of smooth vintage piano work and his gritty but relatable stories. I most definitely need to tap into more of his music because this is one of the best quote-unquote purist hip-hop albums of the year. We go from vintage to super futuristic. Number 17 is 2093 by Yeet. I knew for a fact something great was coming from Yeet when I heard the direction he went on in last year's Bigger Than Everything track. It was what the title suggested. The scope of the song sounded like a whole movie. 2093 expounds on this with undoubtedly the best Yeet album so far. The beats are like living organic beings fusing with the technology of the future. Yeet's voice is at its most expressive all over the album, flipping between super serene moments and blown out moments. I need to take a moment to point out one song in particular that's brought the earth, without a doubt one of the best Yeet songs ever. The strings, the way the track never stagnates, and how surprisingly vulnerable it is, it's a great advert for the album. 16 is an album that's rooted in vulnerability. That's Please Don't Cry by Rhapsody. Ironically, I did in fact cry the first time I heard this album on a summertime flight back home. Rhapsody has been dropping fire for so many years now, but this album is where she strips layers back we might not have even known were there. It's an album about identity, sexuality, and hip-hop itself. Her beat selection is top tier, rooted in classic hip-hop sensibilities with a dusty filter over everything. It's a huge album that, for the most part, never stagnates or fails to be engaging. Again, I do need to point out one track in particular. That's the song That One Time, the thing that made me cry the first time I heard it. It isn't subtle, which isn't always necessary. It is, however, one of the most personal songs I've heard all year. 15 is one of the biggest commercial hip-hop projects of the year. That's We Don't Trust You by Future and Metro Boomin. Legends in their own rights who have worked together for 10 plus years now. We Don't Trust You is the best parts of both artists coming together. Metro's beats are as clean, polished, and dark as ever, paired alongside some of Future's best rapping in years. It was just never gonna fail. Simply just a stacked track list for me. The title track, Type Shit, Cinderella, and of course, Like That, with maybe the single most important verse of the year from a certain rapper. For me, I think the last few years post-COVID has been a bit of a tough time for trap music as we know it. In my opinion, a lot of Future's contemporaries have dropped a lot of mid, and this album reminds us just how fun and cold it can be when it's done right. 14 is one of two albums dropped by The Smile this year, Wall of Eyes. Wall of Eyes is maybe even looser and more experimental than A Light for Attracting Attention, but has all the components that make their music so good and also feed the inevitable Radiohead fans that flock to their music. It's dreary, funky in places, and as with all of their music, has a layer of ghostly appeal. Teleharmonic is this weird but amazing mesh of ambient and alternative rock that is so transfixing. The first single that dropped last year, Bending Hectic, is an unsettling, slow, creeping build of tension and melancholy that starts and ends in wildly different places. I hope they continue to release music at the rate they're doing it because I just need more of this. 13 is a genre-defying album revolving around a strong R&B core, Bird's Eye by Raven Lenae. This album is just so warm, vintage, soulful, all tied together by her amazing, unique voice. It's a fusion of 80s synth, 90s R&B with a serving of indie and lo-fi influences that mesh so naturally. Again, I will admit that I slept on Raven Lenae before this album came out, but this shit is amazing. It's a tight 35-minute runtime that has enough variety between songs to fill an album double that length. Candy, for example, is the definition of sweet, unadulterated love and loving the idea of being in love. The reggae instrumental, her super breathy vocals, and subtle synths make this sound like literal love to me. One Wish, with the amazing Childish Gambino feature, is one of the best ballads of the year. The twanging guitars and vocal chops are beautiful as they run with the incredibly vulnerable and evocative idea of being disappointed by a parent. Those simple but resonant moments are all over the album and is maybe the main reason I keep going back to it. 12 is another inventive approach to R&B, Why Lord by No Worries, aka the group composed of Anderson .Paak and producer Knowledge. I was actually not the biggest fan of their previous collab album Yes Lord, much preferring a lot of the two respective artists' solo work. I think this new album improves on the previous album by pretty much every metric. The beats are more soulful, more detailed, jazzier. Anderson .Paak's voice is somehow even better and his lyrics are more interesting to me. It's one of the smoothest albums of the year with a list of standout features including her, Earl Sweatshirt, Thundercat, and Snoop Dogg, who's featured on my favorite song, From Here. That wailing vocal sample and guitars are insane to me. Knowledge's unique approach to soul sampling is the star of the album to me, and a testament to his taste and approach to production. 11 is admittedly not a very fun album, but another addition to this artist's particularly existential approach to rap music, Memoirs in Amour by Navy Blue. Navy Blue's music is usually emotionally heavy, dealing with death, loss, existence, and aging. All of that is amazingly explored on this album with only 25 minutes of runtime. Every song seems to expound on the previous one in real time, and on a more macro level, Navy Blue continues to reflect and ponder as if time stands still every time he raps. I will say that I don't listen to this album very much. It's kind of too transcendent to do so regularly. But when I do, you just have to lock the fuck in and nothing else matters for that 30 minutes. If you haven't heard this album, please just take 2 minutes out of your time to listen to the second track, Boulder, and you will immediately understand why this is one of the best albums of the year. Number 10 is one of the biggest mainstream albums of the year from one of the biggest artists on the planet, Hit Me Hard and Soft by Billie Eilish. Billie Eilish continues to remain on top of the world, making music completely on her own terms. Hit Me Hard and Soft has all of the Billie Eilish isms you'd expect: emotionally vulnerable songwriting, dark dreamy soundscapes, and a fusion of genres. This new album displays the spectrum and variety of influences that make up the artist she is, pulling from even wider scopes than the previous albums. R&B, bedroom pop, dance, jazz, and even some house too. It's an album about love and loss, vague on the surface, but incredibly personal in its execution. Birds of a Feather is easily the biggest hit on the album, and I think it's one of those instances where the biggest song is also just the best one. A flat-out love song in every sense of the word, with a strange resemblance in its chord progression to Last Christmas by Wham of all songs. Sometimes the simplest emotion is all you need. There's a string of standouts on the album, particularly Wildflower and Bittersweet. The 10-track runtime and perfectly sequenced tracklist makes for one of the most replayable albums of the year. Number 9 blew me away the very first time I heard it and continues to do so with each listen. Something in the Room She Moves by Julia Holter. Apparently inspired by the birth of her daughter, this new album is eclectic with its lyricism and instrumentation. There's saxophones, Wurlitzers, clanking drums, and even some bagpipes in there. Lyrically, it can be hard to place, but it's part of the appeal of how fluid and evolving every aspect of the album is. Like a lot of Julia Holter's music, it's incredibly impressionistic and leaves you with something new after each listen. The fusion of ambience, pop, chamber music, jazz, and more adds to how organic everything feels. Number 8 is flat out one of the most fun listening experiences I've had all year. The New Sound by Jordy Greep, his debut album after the split of Black Midi. I'll flat out say that I think this album, I don't know if this is a hot take, but I think this album is better than any Black Midi album I've heard previously. The New Sound might be one of the most unsubtle albums of 2024, but that doesn't detract from how amazing it is. Most, if not all of the songs are written from the perspective of some truly pathetic men, larger-than-life caricatures of dude who somehow seem to actually exist in the real world. The kind of men who claims all of the entire world should bask in his sexual prowess. It can be conflicting when the narrators of these songs are so clearly awful narcissists, but it's a clear, overt send-up of those tropes. It's a satire. Musically, this is something else. It's something different. It's a new sound, as it would suggest. The mesh of Latin music, jazz, post-rock, math rock is perfect. The bluesy guitar riff on Holy Holy, the crazy drums on Blues, the bass work on the title track, the pianos on As If Waltz, everything feels so intentional and improvised at the same time. There are points in the album where I feel like I'm listening to Gene Wilder in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in the best way possible. The new sound is propelling, kinetic, invigorating. The amount of new musical passages and interesting ideas is so ridiculous that you hardly notice the hour-plus runtime. Number 7 is also an incredibly forward-thinking album from pop duo Magdalena Bay, Imaginal Disc. This was one of those albums that kept being recommended everywhere I went online, so I finally caved and checked it out. I was in within about a minute of the opening song. The closest thing I could compare it to, for me, was the first time I heard Clarence Clarity like 10 years ago. It's this shimmering, futuristic pop that's rooted in familiar song structures and nods to some 2000s electropop acts. But the lyrics, of course, mask something slightly darker and more unnerving than the soundscape might suggest. The approach to the loose concept tying the album together, revolving around this character acclimatizing to humanity, it appears, plays out like a soap opera. There's elements of disco, new wave, psychedelic music, but flat out, some of the best pop songs you'll hear all year are on this album. Fear Sex might be at the very top of that list with one of the best vocal performances of the year. 2024 has been the year of pop music, and I think this album is one of the best ambassadors for that. Number 6 is an album that surpassed all of my expectations and is one I still think not enough people have been talking about, Worldwide Whack by Tierra Whack. I've always thought Tierra Whack was super talented, but a full-length project never really hit for me personally. That changed as soon as I heard this new album. Worldwide Whack plays out like a dark comedy. Tierra never lets up with her specific style as she deals with some pretty heavy subject matter whilst retaining a strong sense of humor. Some of the beats sound like childlike wonder, particularly Chanel Pit and Accessible. It's an album that deals with paranoia, trust issues, anxiety, trauma, and existential dread. And it's the way she straddles humor and tragedy so comfortably that makes it such an amazing listen. I love the diary entry-like songwriting on the tracks. It's very matter-of-fact and blunt, but she is still spitting all over the album. It's full of dark moments like Burning Brains, like Difficult or 27 Club, but importantly, the lighter moments are treated with just as much care and detail. Movies is a super simple song. It's literally about Tierra wanting her love interest to take her on a date to the movies. But it's that specificity, that narrow focus on individual tracks that makes it so personal and relatable. I personally find it incredibly romantic to frame the concept of love through the lens of the mundane and the everyday. You're going to go to the movies with your partner far more than, say, taking a trip to Barbados and watching the sunset on the beach. Shower Song is hilarious. Again, it's literally about her singing in the shower, being completely uninhibited. Not to mention it's one of the funkiest songs to come out this year. Thematically on point, this has been one of my shower songs for 2024. Number 5 is an eclectic mix and a cultural encyclopedia of an album, Cowboy Carter by Beyonce. The second album in a supposed trilogy centered on reclaiming traditionally black expressions of art and music. Beyonce followed up 2022's Renaissance with her interpretation of country music. It's a humongous album, consistently shifting in style, mood, emotion, and sonic landscapes that paints a vivid picture of black American expression. Cowboy Carter is 80 minutes over 25 tracks in length, but it never bores. She uses this time to plot a lineage of black history through the lens of country music, mashing it together with sprinkles of pop, rock, R&B, and soul. She uses her platform to celebrate both country legends and lesser-known artists, with features ranging from Dolly Parton and Willie Nelson to Shaboozey and Britney Spencer. Tender moments like Protector or Daughter are interspersed seamlessly with hard-hitting, aggressive, and expansive tracks like Spaghetti or Yaya. It feels like a movie, complete with grand songwriting and film-sized instruments, and will go a long way to introducing people to a genre of music that is all too often written off, and I'll admit to previously being in that camp. Number 4 is an album I made a 50-minute video on, so I won't digress too much about it, but if you've seen that video, you'll know how much I adore Chromacopia by Tyler, the Creator. Seeing in real time Tyler's musical and artistic progression over the last 15 years has been some journey, and we're now at a point where Tyler is making his most mature and nuanced music. An album focused on the passage of time, aging, and parenthood, Tyler sheds his mask to bare his soul on some of the most vulnerable music he's ever made. Like Him and Tomorrow gives us glimpses into a section of Tyler's world we've rarely heard. The fusion of hip-hop, neo-soul, and R&B is amazing, and as always, he utilizes a range of genres and features to great effect. There are very few artists crafting vivid worlds, not only in hip-hop, but in popular music in general, as well as Tyler continues to do. Chromacopia is the synthesis of all the sounds he's experimented with before, making for a truly visceral experience. Number 3 is most definitely not visceral, but is the smoothest album I've heard all year. Charm by Clairo. 70s inspired soft rock, sprinkles of R&B and lo-fi music, and a simple but effective writing style are the selling points of Charm. Admittedly, this is the first Clairo album I've ever heard, and the only reason I listened to it was because I was on a long-haul flight with a friend of mine who was listening to it and was like, why the fuck is this album so good? I believed the hype as soon as I heard the first track, Nomad. Every nook, cranny, and texture of Charm is so warm and homey, but that doesn't mean the lyrics and songwriting don't get dark or nuanced. It most definitely does. So many highlights are on here for me. The pianos on Sexy to Someone, the vocal samples on Terrapin, the wonder of Second Nature. I honestly think there isn't a single skip on Charm. It sounds like autumn, like going on a walk as the leaves begin to change colors. And I think it's very hard to pull off that breathy style of singing that Clara employs here, but it's so soft and delicate that it just works. The runner-up, number 2, was my number 1 for most of the year and most of whilst I was writing this list. Undoubtedly one of the biggest pop culture moments of 2024, Brat by Charli XCX. Charli XCX has been my favorite pop artist for the last 7 or 8 years now. She's been at the forefront of forward-thinking, boundary-pushing pop music with an experimental edge. Brat is still that, also rooted in her early dance and rave music days, just with a crazy commercial appeal. And what she never forgets is the layers of vulnerability that mix alongside the club bangers. Von Dutch hits harder because of, I might say something stupid. 365 hits hard because of I Think About It All the Time. Her taste and sensibilities, cadences and flows and pockets she chooses are unmatched, and Brat is one of the best examples of all the talents she has at her disposal. Brat straddles anxiety and confidence on a razor-thin wire consistently, not to mention providing some of the very best songs of the year. Everything is romantic, Sympathy is a Knife, Girl So Confusing, 360, 365, and that's not even mentioning the deluxe and remix tracks, which only add to her lore. I'm so glad that Charli is getting the worldwide attention her music has deserved for so long. I hope the new ears go back and listen to Pop 2 and Number 1 Angel and How I'm Feeling Now, because Brat is just the final confirmation for me that she is the most interesting and creative pop artist we currently have. And number 1, if you know me, if you know this channel, if you've seen my previous videos, you'll know what it is. It's GNX by Kendrick Lamar. Like Chromacopia, I made an in-depth video explaining exactly why this album is so fucking good, so I won't go too deep. One of the functions of GNX is, of course, acting as a victory lap for his dissection of Drake early on in the year, backing up the various claims he made during the beef. It's also, of course, a love letter to LA and the West Coast. It's in your face, confrontational and aggressive, with moments of clarity and introspection laced throughout that provides welcome variety to its tracklist. It's a commentary on the state of play of hip-hop in 2024, as Kendrick seems to be fighting for the soul of the art form that he clearly loves, only now he's not looking to change the world. Violence and tearing it all down seems to be the motive on GNX. There is so much to say about this album. I'll link my video here so I can bring this video to a close, because I'll just start yapping for another hour about GNX. But yeah, GNX, it's the album of the year, my favorite album of 2024. It was always going to be GNX, come on. That is my list. Please feel free to drop your lists in the comments. That is me for the year. I will be back towards the start of 2025.